Well, Emily, it is so great to have you here on See Here Love. Welcome to the show.
What a joy to be here, Melinda. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks so much. And I love that we're going to be talking about making space to make right decisions and to discern our next right thing in love. I love that. I that just resonates so strongly with me. Emily, so I'm so glad that you're here because I have a lot of questions for you. And especially around the area of making decisions. So, when I was with my girlfriends the past couple of weeks, they have questions for you. I have questions for you. So, here are the top four. Are you ready
Yes,
about making
ma'am.
space for making good and healthy decisions? Okay, number one, when you're overwhelmed with too many choices and decisions, how do I pick just one? I know. Yes.
Right, right. That's such a good question. And I think that we are conditioned to think that we can multitask with ease. And in fact, the truth is that we can only do one thing at a time. I know a lot of women are like, listen, let me tell you how many things I can do at a time. And it's true, we can kind of, but are we doing those things well is the question. But really the truth is that we really, when we're doing a thing or thinking about a thing, or we are, even if we're doing things in rapid succession very quickly, we are doing one thing at a time. And I think my encouragement to myself when I'm feeling that way is to give it a little bit of space between each of those things. And the practice for me of doing the next right thing has been life changing, because it's not to say that you have to choose one decision over another or that one is more important than another. It is just saying, okay, in this moment, whatever today is at this time of day, what's my next right thing right now? And sometimes that is go check the mail. And when you get back from the mail, then it's what is my next right thing now? And so when it comes to this big life decisions and the small decisions, really the path is what's my next right thing in this moment? And tomorrow the answer might be different. But I think that's helped me. Just that one question has helped me discern and decide for a myriad of different types of decisions.
Yeah, no, I like that. The one thing, because sometimes I do, and I get overwhelmed by so many that I actually like get in a panic and anxiety and like literally just sort of like end up just standing there,
Yes.
not being able to decide. That's really good. I love that. Okay, number two, second question, decision fatigue. I am just way too tired to make decisions, so I don't. And
Yeah.
especially in the middle of a pandemic, even more so. What would you say to that? That I'm just too tired to make
I
decisions.
I do find that a lot of people, they're really great quick decision makers, and then they hit a wall of decision fatigue and it confuses them because they're like, wait a minute, I'm a power person, so why is this thing that used to be so easy for me so difficult? And then there's another group of people, and I count myself kind of in this, where we're more chronically hesitant. Like we've always kind of been hesitant to make decisions.
Mm.
And so when we have to make a lot of decisions, the fatigue sets in. But either way, I think that part of the reason why decision making overwhelms us so much is we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to make the right decision. And we can be afraid to move forward because we're not sure which is the best or right or which will have the best consequences. And we become little outcome managers. And when we're trying to manage our outcomes, that's when I think the decision fatigue sets in even more. And then compound that with, like you said, a pandemic, a life, even a joyful life situation that we might find ourselves in can cause decision fatigue, and it piles on. And once again, that beautiful phrase, do the next right thing in love. I think we tend to focus on the word right, but I like to remind myself to focus on the word next. What's just the next thing? Because again, decision fatigue is when you're almost looking at all the decisions at once and you feel paralyzed to know where to begin.
Yeah.
But that simple question, just what's your next right thing? And then ask it again. That is, it's like a rhythm almost. And once you begin to practice it, it becomes almost a way of life.
Good. I like that. I'm hearing sort of this thread, Emily, of just like one thing, breathe,
Yes.
make some space, and then the next right thing, not like the
Hmm.
next 100 things or even the 5 things. It's like the next one right thing.
Yes.
Good. Now you mentioned chronic hesitation. This is the one my girlfriends and I chuckled about because a lot of times, even though we are leaders and, here we are, moms and, people who connect and networkers, there is this chronic hesitation that you are always thinking like, Oh, is that the decision? Is that the decision? Is that the decision? And you hesitate. And sometimes you miss out. And then
Mhm.
sometimes you're just like, I can't decide. So then again, I don't make the decision.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And I think that that fear of missing out, a
Mm,
lot of us really can struggle with that. And sometimes we say yes when really the wise decision would have been to say no because we didn't want to miss out. And sometimes we say no because we're afraid to be a part of something when in fact our wisest move would have been to say yes. And so for me, I find it's really helpful for me to have two really key people in my life. One is a yes mentor and one is a no mentor.
mhm.
And to have someone in your life who you can go to. In fact, one of my yes mentors is Annie F. Downs in my real life,
Amazing.
right?
Yeah.
She's fantastic. She's a great friend to say, I think this thing sounds really fun, or I think this thing sounds scary, but I would like to do it. What do you think? Or what? And she always encourages me to chase the fun, if at all possible. Whereas my sister, who has known me since I was a tiny toddler person, she's someone who helps me evaluate what might be my wise no, what might be I'm trying to take on too much. And usually intrinsically we know what we really want to do, but we need someone else who knows us well, not everyone, but maybe one person in each category to say, Melinda, you can do this, you need to move forward and do this in love. Or someone to say, Emily, you don't want to do this, and it's okay to say no.
Mhm.
Yes mentor, no mentor. They don't we might not have both of those in our life right now, but I like to always keep your eyes open for like, who can I go to who can be a co-listener to my own life with me so that I can move forward with confidence into my next right thing.
Love it. That's so good. That's really empowering and really encouraging. Emily. Okay. Here's the big one. So this is the fourth question that came up in my girlfriend conversations. I always regret and or second guess my decisions once I make them. So I've heard so many of my girlfriends go, so okay, we finally get to a decision,
Yeah.
we make it, and then once we make it, we go, oh shoot, was
Yeah.
that the right decision? I think that was the wrong decision. And then you
Mhm.
start regretting things that you didn't decide. What do you say to us that are struggling with that?
First of all, I can deeply relate with that.
Okay.
And second of all, I would say I have found a lot of relief and peace in remembering that yes, we focus on the decision and we want to make good decisions. We do. We want to make good, right, healthy, wise decisions that's not just for us, but for our people. But when it comes down to it, the invitation, and this is can be a lifelong learning, but the invitation is that your decision is really rarely about the decision. It's really about the person who you are becoming. And sometimes we have to step into things and make decisions for the sake of growth, for the sake of something we want to need to learn and maybe couldn't have learned it any other way. For some of us, making a kind of a tricky or a bad quote unquote decision might be the best thing for us, because if we can be reflective, which I'm a huge fan of reflection, I believe it's so important to look back before we move forward. And I think reflection is a active, it's not passive like we sometimes think, but the best indicator of future healthy good decisions are decisions we've made in the past. And sometimes those are decisions that we weren't proud of, or that we kind of messed up, or that we just didn't know enough information yet. And
Mhm.
so I think adopting a posture where we are learning to be our own friend, to be kind to ourselves, to not say things to us that we wouldn't say to our best friend or our sisters, and just to take those decisions and say, you know what, now that I know more, I would have chosen differently, but I am becoming someone who pays attention
Ooh,
to my life.
mhm.
And that is a lovely next right thing, is the
Great.
person who you are becoming.
I love that. So even if it wasn't the best decision, or maybe the perfect right decision, I feel in every decision, Emily, you can then turn them around
Yeah.
and make them work for you, or find the
Yes.
goodness or the humor in the decision, even if it wasn't the best. And I love that, being kind to yourself in that, to say, okay, oh well, and not be so hard on yourself. It's really
Yes.
good. Emily, for people who are saying, okay, so I want to be that kind of person, where does, and I think this is a question even for myself. So, I follow Jesus. I pray, I speak to him, and I want his leading. But what would you say for you, even personally? Where is that where we listen, we pray, we discern, with God's spirit in us leading us, but also we need to also make choices. We have free
Sure.
will to choose.
Yeah.
What would you say is the balance in making that next right thing in love in relationship with Jesus today?
I love this question. And I think this is where people of faith often can get really confused and be really hard on ourselves
Yeah.
because we want to say, not just like, well, what do I want to do or what do I think is my next right thing, but what does God think? And it's a lovely question.
Mhm.
And I think it all really comes down to what we imagine when we think about God influences every decision we make. And some of us imagine God as holding the right decision in one hand behind his back and the wrong decision in the other hand. And he's looking at us and saying, pick which one. And we feel afraid and we feel like, what if we get it wrong? But I think that the beauty for me has been in seeing God differently, in him having both hands out in front and saying, come be with me, come, let's do this together. And if you trip, I'm going to help get you back up. And we are going to walk together in friendship and unity. And no matter what happens, I'm going to be there for you and I'm going to love you. And making decisions with that posture, if you think about even a parent child relationship, there's much more freedom and lightness than to think that he's waiting for us to make a decision and he's going to, and we're kind of on our own. So I
Mhm.
think that what I think about when I think about God, I think it was A.W. Tozier who said that's one of the most important things about us. But I also think it's really important what God thinks about when he thinks about us.
Mhm.
And once we kind of get that to a place where we feel like we belong and we're accepted, decision making almost becomes secondary, and it becomes a journey of discovery and of living our life, and of not like you said earlier, not being so hard on ourselves, and maybe not having the right decision be the main thing.
Yeah, I love that. Emily, you're talking about reflection, and honestly, I have to do that shit. Like the journal part, it is so beautiful. And I think one of the things that, as I was, looking on your website and reading through the book about this intentional way of doing life. Like it's funny how people are like, how do I do life? And you know, what resources are out there, and how do I change my life? And yet they're not willing to do the work, not willing to be reflective and think about things and making changes. And so I really appreciate that you've given us not just the book, but also this companion. And so I really want to work on that for myself. But when I was on your website, and what we'll do, I think, is there's 4 areas about making space. And I know we don't really have the time to do the 4, but maybe I'll read them and then you can choose the one to expand on, because I think these are so good. These are all 4 areas of sort of making space that I'm like, this is me. I can learn from you, Emily, on this. So the first one is making space for time management for ourselves. Now, I have a hard time with time management. And so you have choose your absence, ignore with intention, find no mentor, which you mentioned earlier, and embrace your limits. Out of the 4, which one would you say maybe this is the one we can talk about? Because I think the time management part is really big for busy women,
Yeah.
and not just for busy women, anybody. Because I think a lot of times we go, we don't have enough time to do things, and yet we
Yes.
always will find time to do the things we want to find time to do.
I think that's a great place to go to dig
Okay.
into a little bit, is because you had said earlier that a lot of us we want to live intentional lives, but we aren't willing to do the work. And I would tweak that a bit and say we don't know where to start. I think a lot of people want to do it and they want to manage their time well,
Mhm.
so that we can have a foundation for making good decisions, but we don't know where to begin. And
Right.
so, with this concept of how do we make space for time management, which really what we're saying is, how do we make space for what matters most? Because
Mhm.
that's what time, why manage your time? It's because
Right.
you know what's important and you want to prioritize it, but you don't know where to start. And
Mhm.
so when I think of these practices like looking back before looking forward, and some of the things that you mentioned from the journal of paying attention to your life every month and saying, what was life draining this month? And what was life giving this month? And keeping a running list of asking myself, what questions am I carrying into this week? Writing them down in question form, because every decision begins as a question. So when you think about time management, even look at your calendar and think, okay, what's stressing me out about my calendar this week? Write it down as a question. And then don't seek so much to find an answer, but look for the arrows instead. What is my next right thing? I'm really nervous. I don't have a carpool buddy for school. who am I going to get to carpool with? Who am I going to get to take my kids to school because I have to work in the afternoons? Writing it down as a question. This is very practical. And then paying attention as you go through the week, asking God as you go through the week. And it's remarkable to me what can happen when I put words to paper, or even just, type it in your, wherever you make notes of things.
Mhm.
um, Getting really specific, because a lot of times we feel overwhelmed in a general smoky sense, and that can cause stress, and we're like, I have no time, I'm so overrun, and I don't know, where to start. But when we begin to break it down to, okay, let's make a list. What is stressing me about my time? What are the questions I'm carrying? What are some arrows that I can look for just for my next right thing? And one thing really practical I would say is, having setting a timer for a 5 minute, I like to say it's like a 5 minute silence every morning, um, has been remarkable for me in my time management, because what that does is, to me, silence is to the soul as decluttering is to my home. And so we're always taking an input. And when I have time to set aside and say, I'm just going to be silent here, maybe I'll pray, maybe I'll just sit here with my coffee and
Mhm.
allow myself to kind of let go of some of those things that have been sticky. That can be, when it comes to your rhythm of life, that can be one rung on the trellis of your life's rhythm that you can begin to build on. That can help you clear a little space in your day. It doesn't have to be in the morning, it can be in the middle of the day, it can be in the evening. But just knowing that you have a little 5 minutes of decluttering your soul, where you can kind of let things settle in and pay attention to those questions, before kind of carrying on. That's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, I like that. So just a timer, 5 minutes,
Yeah.
Emily.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just silence and quieting like your spirit and soul, mind to get yourself ready. I like that. That's good, and that's a practical thing. Anybody can do that.
Anybody can do it.
Yeah. Okay, that's fantastic. I love it. Okay, you also have making space for starting over. So a job change, a new baby, a diagnosis, an engagement, even a time of transition. And your 4 points are: be a beginner, stop collecting gurus, I like that, gather co listeners, and pick what you like. I think that's a good one. A lot of people are in that place right now, and all the time throughout your life, of starting over.
I think we put a lot of celebration and excitement around new beginnings. Oh, it's a new beginning. We're starting over, and yay, or Easter, or it's a birthday, or whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
But when it comes to being a beginner, we don't like that so much. We celebrate new beginnings, but if I have to be a beginner, no, thank you. I don't want to be the one who doesn't know the passwords. I don't want to be the one who has to ask where the bathroom is. I want to be the smartest person in the room. I don't
Mhm.
want to have to learn. And so when it comes to decision making, when you're a beginner, it can be so overwhelming because you're like, I don't know. But I
Right.
have discovered such beauty in the posture of being a beginner, of knowing that you're not going to be a beginner forever. So let me learn what I need to learn in this space of humility and of learning and of starting again. It doesn't have to mean um, that I'm going to be a beginner forever. We're
Right.
not a beginner forever. But what could I learn here in this space? Who can I become as I move into this new beginning as a beginner? Um, and how can that grow me in a way that I would not have been able to grow if I was the quote unquote smartest person in the room?
Right. Oh, I like that. That's good. It's really good. All right. Third one is making space. This is good, for letting go. What do we need to release? And I will say, Emily, during this pandemic, it's been fascinating that I've had the space to do an inventory on decisions I made sort of pre COVID
Mm,
19, and how I kept my life very busy, and realizing now that a lot of it was just noise and just activity, not for the sake of, honestly, I'll be honest, I mean, a lot of it I should have just said no to. I didn't need to be at all those different parties or events, but it was more FOMO or more just because.
yeah.
And anyway, I this one was really good. So, making space for letting go. What do we need to release today? And you've got a ton. Stop rushing. Clarity, stand on your head. Remember the real art, and hold one thing at a time.
Yeah, that hold one thing at a time. And I know we keep coming back to it,
Mm,
but I think there's a reason we keep
yeah.
coming back to it, is because um, we live in a culture that praises people who can do it all, which we obviously know that's a myth.
Yeah.
but we still buy into it. We
Mhm.
still do. And so those daily practices or weekly practices of, for example, we mentioned it a little bit before, but this idea of um, what was life giving to me this week? When did I feel most like myself?
Yeah.
And then reflection, when did I not feel so much like myself? When did I feel overwhelmed? Now, clearly we can't eliminate all those places where we feel overwhelmed,
Mhm.
but like you said, there are some areas where we can. And those areas where we have agency, where we can say, I can do 2 events. I can't do 10 this week. That's out of my, whatever your limits are.
Mhm.
Um, that can be so helpful in clearing the space to make room for what matters most. But we have to decide first what matters most, because if we don't decide it, someone else will decide it for us. And
Mhm.
then we're realizing that sometimes some of us are, like you said, beginning a pandemic, some of us realize we were maybe living up, having core values for our lives that weren't even our own, that were ones that were put on us that we thought should be our values. And really, they're not. So taking the space to recognize what matters most to me, and then how can I set my life up to make decisions that reflect that, and also ignore things on purpose that don't reflect that.
Mm. Ooh, these are good, Emily. You are good. Amazing. All right. The fourth one. Ha. In that, this is a good sort of like segue, making space for relationships when you can't control them. And everybody was like, huh? But oh, so true. And so you have 4 points: release your agenda, look for arrows, not answers, come home to yourself, and choose connection. That's a big one, making space for relationships. And, obviously it's not just all relationships, but I think really intentional, healthy, good relationships for your life.
We have a chronic listening problem. I wish that we had a class that every high schooler had to take before they could graduate that was called like Listening 101. We have public speaking. Why don't we have listening?
Well, why don't you start doing that? Why don't
Maybe I
you
will,
start making a
Melinda.
campaign, Emily, and I'll
Maybe
be with
that's my
you.
next thing, because the way that we listen is we listen with an agenda of what we're going to say next, rather than listening, like they teach you in acting, listening and then actually responding to the person of what they're saying. And one practical way of making space for connection and intentional relationships that I've found is asking the second question. Because oftentimes someone shares something with you, and maybe you ask a question in curiosity or to learn more, and they answer, and then we move on. And that right there could be a lovely conversation. But I think that for me, one practice that I try to engage is not to make a statement until I've asked the second question. It's the question beneath the question. And often that intentional second question is actually where we really get down to the matter. Because a lot of us, how are you? I'm fine. Oh, what's been going on? And you answer, and it stays kind of up here. But when someone actually pauses and takes in what you've said and asks you a second or a third question, we actually aren't listened to on the regular. And when you find someone who truly listens to you, it stands out. And that's because we're not used to it. And so if you're someone who's longing, like, I wish someone would listen to me, because I think we all long to be seen and heard and listened to, my encouragement would be the person who listens to others, and you will find your people, but you might have to be the one to start.
That's so good. Emily, last thought. So, we're sitting here and there are viewers and listeners who are listening going, yes, yes, and yes. What would you say is the first step to saying, okay, I want to do the next right thing? I want to discern the next right thing in love. What's your encouragement to that young woman today?
Well, I would say mainly, especially for those who might be, if I say, do you have a decision you're struggling with right now? Almost everyone says yes.
Mhm.
Yes, I have one in mind right now. And they wish that they could be like, okay, I'd like to sit with you and so you can help me figure this out. And that would be lovely. And I love doing that with people. But I think that my first encouragement would be, can you put that decision into one sentence?
Mm.
Sometimes that overwhelm comes because we think we have a decision to make, but actually there's no action to be taken yet. It's just something that's stressing us out. And so until you can put your decision in one sentence, you don't have a decision to make. Because if you can't clearly state what the decision is, you will not be able to make a clear choice. And so that's really one really lovely next step. And it is a way of naming. That's kind of the practice beneath that is, of naming in specificity, uh,
Hmm.
what matters, what is the decision, because I will say that the overwhelm is lacks the specificity, and clarity comes when we can name it, put it in a sentence, and then ask myself, okay, what is my next right thing? I might not get a full answer to this decision, but what is one next right thing I can do today that will move me closer to the answer that I'm looking for?
Love it. Emily P. Freeman, author of The Next Right Thing. Here it is. Wonderful book. And I got to just do this and the journal to help us along. It was a pleasure having you on the show and also with your really good friend, Annie F. Downs. And what a show. Thank you so much for the very practical things we can do, but also just a reminder I love to be kind to ourselves, to take 5 minutes of silence, take some time for reflection that will help us in making space for making healthy and good decisions. So thank you so much for being with me today.
My pleasure. Thank you.